The truth hidden in silence. Leah sat by the small window in their cramped apartment, her hand gently caressing her swollen belly. The cold winter air drifted through the cracked window, offering a brief respite from the stifling heat of the small room. Outside, the streets of Cincinnati buzzed with the usual sounds of their working-class neighborhood. The distant honk of a horn, the laughter of children playing basketball on the cracked pavement, and the occasional barking of a dog chasing after a passing car. The apartment they called home was modest at best. Its walls were worn, the floors creaked with every step, and the faded curtains fluttered in the breeze like ghosts from a forgotten time. Yet, despite the roughness of their surroundings, Leah found comfort in the familiar hum of their everyday life. Inside, the apartment was cluttered with mismatched furniture, hand-me-downs from generous neighbors, from family members who had given what they could. The air carried a faint scent of lavender, a relic of their late grandmother's favorite room spray. It lingered faintly in the corners, a memory of better days. Leah's twin sister, Luna, was in the kitchen trying to make tea. The stove, old and unreliable, sputtered and cracked as she coaxed it into life. Leah couldn't help but smile at the sight of Luna's determined expression, though a sense of unease gnawed at her. She hadn't been able to shake the thought that something wasn't right. The weight of her unborn child pressed heavily against her, but it wasn't just her pregnancy that was on her mind. "What's wrong, Leah?" Luna's voice broke through her thoughts, sharp and inquisitive. She had stepped into the living room, her face half hidden in the soft glow of the flickering fluorescent light above the stove. Leah paused, unsure of how to voice the swirling thoughts in her head. Just thinking about that project. The family history thing. Luna nodded. "Yeah, I've been thinking about that too. Wondering about Dad. I guess. It's always been one of those things we've never really known. What if this project can finally give us some answers?" Leah's voice was soft as she continued. "What if it doesn't? What if it just brings up more questions, more things we don't know? I mean, we don't even know who our father is." Luna's expression shifted, a sharp bitterness coloring her tone. "If he was someone important, don't you think he would have been around? He's never been there for us." The silence that followed felt heavy, and Leah could sense Luna's frustration. But before either twin could voice any more words, the sound of the front door creaking open cut through the tension. Their mother, Margaret, stepped inside, her face weary from another long shift at the diner. The smell of grease and coffee clung to her clothes, and she seemed to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. "Girls," Margaret greeted, her voice strained but still holding on to the pretense of cheerfulness. "What's for dinner?" "Leftover stew," Luna replied, her voice devoid of emotion. Leah, however, couldn't hold back her excitement. "Mom, we're doing this project at school where we trace our family ancestry. They even let us use DNA kits. Isn't that cool?" Margaret froze in place. The sound of her keys clinking against the counter was the only sound that filled the room as her face drained of color. She turned to look at Leah, her eyes wide with something. Fear, perhaps, that Leah couldn't quite place. "DNA kits." Margaret's voice came out in a hushed whisper, barely audible. "What are you talking about?" Leah, oblivious to the sudden shift in her mother's demeanor, continued with excitement. "Yeah, we can learn all about our roots, where we come from. Maybe even." Margaret cut her off, her tone suddenly sharp and panicked. "No, absolutely not. You're not using those kits." Luna, sensing the sudden tension, raised an eyebrow. "Why not, Mom? It's just a school project. We don't even need money for it. We've already saved up." Margaret's hands trembled as she reached for a glass of water, her movements shaky. "Some things are better left unknown," she muttered, almost as though she were speaking to herself. Leah was taken aback. "What do you mean? Why wouldn't we want to know about our family? All our lives, you've kept us in the dark about Dad. Don't we deserve to know where we come from?" Margaret's eyes welled up with tears, and she quickly turned away, gripping the edge of the sink for support. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "You don't understand. It's not safe. Luna frowned, the disbelief evident in her eyes. What could possibly be unsafe about a school project, Mom? Their mother didn't respond. Instead, she retreated to her bedroom, her footsteps heavy, leaving the twins in a room filled with a thick, uncomfortable silence. Leah turned to Luna, her voice firm. She's hiding something. I know it. She's been hiding it for years. Luna nodded, a deep frown creasing her forehead. But what? And why now? That night, as the darkness of the world outside crept into their small apartment, Leah and Luna lay awake, both lost in their thoughts. The questions that had arisen in their hearts felt like stones weighing them down. What was their mother so afraid of? What was she trying to protect them from? By morning, Leah's resolve had crystallized. There would be no more waiting, no more wondering. They would uncover the truth themselves. Luna slid a small envelope across the table during breakfast. Here, she said, her voice steady. The DNA kits. I ordered them last week. If Mom won't tell us the truth, we'll find it ourselves. Leah hesitated, glancing down at the envelope. For a moment, she wondered if they were making a mistake. But then, the thought of continuing to live in ignorance about their father, about their own history, felt unbearable. With a quiet nod, she agreed. Days passed, and life in their small apartment continued as usual, though the air felt heavier now. Margaret's tension was palpable, and the twins avoided speaking of the DNA kits, but they both knew they were not going to let this go. The kits arrived on a cold Wednesday afternoon, their plain packaging somehow more ominous than expected. Leah's heart raced as she carefully opened the box, her fingers trembling. Luna, ever pragmatic, read the instructions aloud, her voice steady and controlled. The procedure was simple enough. Swab your cheek, seal the tube, and mail it back. Easy. But as Leah completed the task, a strange feeling settled in her chest. She couldn't shake the thought that they were about to uncover something. Something that would change everything. A week later, the results arrived in an email. Leah and Luna crowded around their old laptop, both holding their breath as the screen flickered to life. At first, the results seemed typical: ethnicities, regions of origin, and distant heritage. But then Luna clicked further, her eyes narrowing. Wait, she said, her voice trembling. This doesn't make sense. Leah leaned closer, her stomach twisting in knots. What do you mean? Luna clicked back and forth between their two profiles. We're twins, right? But our DNA, it's different. This can't be right. Leah's eyes scanned the data in disbelief. We're identical. We're supposed to match. Before either of them could process the implications, a notification popped up at the bottom of the screen. Anomalies detected. Immediate medical consultation recommended. The room went silent. Leah's heart pounded in her chest. What does that mean? She whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. Luna's face paled. I don't know, but whatever it is, it's not good. The silence was deafening as the two sisters sat in the dim light of their bedroom, the weight of their discovery hanging in the air like a storm cloud. The world outside went on as usual, blissfully unaware of the chaos that was about to unfold in their small apartment. The hidden storm. The morning light filtered weakly through the curtains, casting a pale glow on the worn walls of the apartment. Leah sat at the edge of the bed, her hands trembling as she stared at the screen, the results of the DNA test still glowing before her. Luna was sitting cross-legged beside her, her normally confident demeanor now shattered by the revelation that their shared genetics had unraveled a mystery they weren't prepared to solve. What does this mean? Leah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Her heart pounded in her chest, fear creeping up her spine like a cold hand. The words anomalies detected echoed in her mind, the phrase becoming more ominous with every passing second. Luna shook her head, still in shock. I don't know, she admitted, running a hand through her hair. Her sharp, pragmatic mind was struggling to make sense of the impossible. I mean, it's supposed to be simple. We're identical twins, but our DNA doesn't match. How can that happen? Leah's stomach twisted. This is something we didn't expect, something bigger than we imagined." She paused, trying to calm her racing thoughts. But why would the company flag this? Why would they tell us to seek medical help? Luna closed the laptop, her fingers pressing down on the keyboard as if it were an anchor she could hold onto to keep herself from floating away. She turned to Leah, her expression hardening with determination, though her eyes still flickered with fear. "We need answers. We can't just sit here and wait for it to fix itself." Leah nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead to the consequences of what they had uncovered. Their father, the man who had always been a shadowy figure in their lives, could he be connected to this? Was it possible that there was something in their bloodline that their mother had kept hidden for so long? A cold shiver ran down Leah's spine. She thought about their mom, Margaret, her protective instinct toward the twins, the secretive way she had always avoided talking about their father, the fear that seemed to come over her whenever the topic of their family history arose. There was something she wasn't telling them, and it wasn't just about their father. It was about them, Leah and Luna. There was something about their very existence that had been concealed from them. As Leah stood and walked to the window, she watched the usual bustle of the street below. People hurrying to work, kids on their way to school, a delivery truck unloading packages. Life went on for everyone else, but for the twins, their world had shifted irreversibly. This was no longer a mere school project. This was the start of an unraveling mystery that would lead them into a maze of secrets and danger, a path that they hadn't even begun to understand. "What do we do now?" Luna asked, breaking the silence. She had closed her eyes, her face twisted in thought. "We need to talk to someone. The DNA company said we should see a genetic specialist. Maybe they can explain what these markers are. What's going on?" Leah turned away from the window, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I don't know, Luna. What if this is more than just some genetic anomaly? What if it's something we really aren't prepared for?" Luna met her sister's gaze, her own eyes hard with resolve. "Then we face it. We've always faced things together, Leah. We can handle whatever comes next, but we can't pretend like this isn't happening. We have to get answers." Leah sighed, knowing Luna was right. They had been through too much in their short lives to back away from something that threatened to change everything. But still, the thought of digging deeper into their mother's past, into the secrets she had fought so hard to keep hidden, made Leah uneasy. She had always been the one to protect Luna, always the one to keep her grounded. But now, she wasn't sure if she could protect Luna from the truth. That afternoon, Leah and Luna sat at their small dining table, the laptop open before them, as they carefully composed an email to the genetic testing company. It felt surreal. Typing out their concerns, their uncertainty about the test results, the mysteries that had started to unravel. They outlined everything they had discovered. The discrepancies between their DNA profiles, the flagged anomalies, and their growing need for clarity. They had questions, but more importantly, they were desperate for answers. As Luna hit send, a deep silence settled over the room. The email was now in the hands of the company's support team, but would they even respond? Would they provide any answers, or was this a case that was far more complicated than they could handle? It was a restless wait. Hours passed, and neither twin could focus on anything else. The tension in the air thickened. Leah found herself pacing the room, her thoughts racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that something or someone was always just out of reach, lurking in the shadows of their lives. Then, finally, an alert appeared on the screen. A new message had arrived. Luna's fingers hovered over the keyboard. And then, slowly, she clicked open the email. Both girls leaned in, reading the words aloud as they processed the message that would shape the course of their lives. "Dear Miss James, thank you for reaching out to us. After reviewing your results, we have determined that your profiles contain rare genetic markers that require further analysis. Based on the anomalies in your data, we strongly recommend that you seek consultation with a qualified genetic specialist. Please understand that this situation is quite complex, and additional steps will be necessary to provide you with the information you are requesting. The email concluded with a list of resources for contacting a genetic specialist. It was official now. Whatever was happening to them was real, and they needed to act fast. Luna closed the laptop with a soft click. Well, that's helpful, I guess. Leah was silent. She felt the ground shift beneath her feet, the earth becoming unstable. The answers they had hoped for weren't just out of reach. They had opened a door to something far darker than they had ever imagined. "Do you think Mom knows about this?" Luna asked, her voice low, almost fearful. Leah swallowed hard. She must. She's always been so careful about everything. About keeping us in the dark. About Dad. She knows something. She has to. Luna looked at her face pale. "Do you think it's connected? Do you think our father?" Before Leah could respond, a loud knock on the front door interrupted them. Both girls froze, their eyes wide in alarm. It wasn't a regular knock. This was urgent, determined. Someone was on the other side, and they weren't here for casual conversation. "Who is that?" Leah whispered, her heart racing. Luna moved swiftly to the window, peering out through the blinds. Her face went white. "There are two men outside. They're wearing suits. They're looking around the building. They're not just here for a friendly chat. Leah, this isn't normal." Leah's breath caught in her throat. She instinctively wrapped her arms around her belly, as if protecting something more than just her unborn child. "What do we do?" Luna's voice was steady, but Leah could see the flicker of panic in her eyes. "We don't answer the door. We don't let them in. They could be connected to all of this, to the things we're starting to uncover." But even as Luna said it, both of them knew that running, hiding, wasn't an option. The truth was closing in around them, and no matter how hard they tried to avoid it, there was no turning back. The sound of footsteps grew louder in the hall outside their door. Then came the knock again, this time more insistent, more demanding. Whoever these men were, they weren't going away. Luna turned to Leah, her voice low but resolute. "Whatever happens next, we face it together." The truth unveiled. The knock echoed through the small apartment like a drumbeat, relentless and foreboding. Leah felt her heart race in her chest, each thud matching the cadence of the sound outside their door. The men's footsteps had stopped, but their presence was like an unshakable weight pressing against the apartment's thin walls. Leah instinctively reached for Luna's hand, their fingers entwining in a silent promise. Whatever was about to happen, they would face it together. Luna's eyes scanned the room, her mind working through the possibilities. The laptop was still on the table, the DNA results and their unanswered questions lingering in the air like a storm waiting to break. She turned to Leah, her voice barely above a whisper, though the panic in her eyes betrayed the calm she tried to project. "Do you think Mom is in trouble?" Leah shook her head, her thoughts swirling. "I don't know, but she's acting different. She's been hiding something from us for years, Luna. This, whatever this is, could be a part of that." Her voice cracked, the enormity of the situation sinking in. "I don't think we can ignore it anymore." The men's voices outside grew louder, now indistinct but unmistakably urgent. Luna moved to the window, peering through the blinds again. The two suited figures stood just outside the door, their posture rigid, like predators closing in on their prey. She could feel the pressure building, the weight of their presence pushing down on her, on the apartment, on her own resolve. "What do we do?" Leah whispered, her voice trembling now. She had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable. The truth they had uncovered felt too big, too dangerous to fully grasp. What if they're here for us? What if they know about the DNA results? Luna's mind raced, the possible answers flickering like lightning in her thoughts. "We don't know what they want yet, but they're not here by chance, Leah. They know something, and they're looking for answers. And I think we're a part of that." Leah felt a deep chill settle over her bones, Her mother's warning echoed in her ears. It's not safe. But what exactly was not safe? They were so close to uncovering the truth, but the closer they got, the more everything seemed to spiral out of control. Before Luna could respond, there was another loud knock, this time followed by a voice, a calm but insistent voice that immediately set Leah on edge. "Miss James, we know you're in there. We need to speak with you. It's very important." Leah's stomach lurched. It wasn't just the authority in their tone that made her pulse quicken. It was the familiarity of the name. Ms. James, their mother. They were here for Margaret. Luna stepped back from the window, her face ashen. What do we do now? Leah didn't answer immediately. She was frozen, the reality of the situation settling in around her like a suffocating fog. Their mother had never mentioned anyone by name, never brought up a soul from the past who could be connected to their history. But now, here they were, two men, strangers, calling for Margaret. And there was something else, something that gnawed at the edges of Leah's mind. Why had Mom warned them so urgently to stay in the room? Another knock came, and this time, Leah didn't flinch. "We can't just sit here," she said, her voice steadier now, though a tremor still ran through her. "We need to know what's going on. We need to talk to Mom." Luna hesitated but finally nodded, her eyes narrowing with determination. "All right, but we do this carefully. We don't know who these men are or what they want. If they're looking for answers, we need to be ready." The twins moved toward the bedroom door. Luna reached for the handle, but Leah stopped her. "Wait," she whispered. "What if we're in danger? What if we don't have all the answers yet? What if the truth is something we're not ready to face?" Luna looked at her sister, her expression softening. "I don't know if we're ready, Leah, but we're already too deep in. We can't turn back now. We'll face whatever happens next, together. Together." It was the one constant in their lives. Their bond, unbroken by time or circumstance, had always been their anchor. And now, in the face of the unknown, it was that bond that gave them the courage to move forward. Luna opened the door cautiously, the faint click of the latch sounding impossibly loud in the stillness of the apartment. Margaret was standing there, her face pale, her posture rigid as though she were bracing for something terrible. Her eyes flicked nervously between the twins and the two men standing behind her in the hallway. Leah's breath caught in her throat as she noticed the men more clearly. They were tall, their suits dark, their expressions unreadable. One of them had a folder in his hand, the kind that looked official, important. The other stood silently, his arms crossed as he observed the room with a piercing gaze. "Mom," Leah began, her voice uncertain, but her mother's eyes flickered with recognition and fear, as though she had hoped the twins wouldn't have discovered what they had. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. The taller man stepped forward, his demeanor cool and professional. "Ms. James," he said, his voice smooth and deliberate, "we need to talk to you. This concerns your daughters." Leah's stomach dropped. She had heard those words, "concerns your daughters," before, but never in a context like this. Her mind raced, trying to piece together fragments of the truth that had remained hidden for so long. "Who are you?" Luna asked, her voice edged with suspicion. "What do you want with us?" The man's gaze softened slightly, but his expression remained stern. "We don't want any trouble. We simply need to verify something. It's important for your safety." Margaret's eyes flicked to the twins, then back to the men. She seemed to deflate in front of them, the walls she had built around herself cracking ever so slightly. She looked like she had been holding her breath, waiting for something. Something she feared. "Please," Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just let me explain. Just give me a chance to explain." The taller man nodded once, signaling to the other to remain silent. "You have 10 minutes, Ms. James. After that, we will be forced to take further action." With a look of desperation, Margaret stepped aside, motioning for the twins to follow her into the small living room. Leah and Luna had exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what was about to unfold. But they couldn't avoid it any longer. They had to know. As the door closed behind them, Margaret sat down on the couch, her hands wringing together in nervous anticipation. The twins sat across from her, their eyes searching her face for any hint of what was happening. Finally, Margaret spoke, her voice breaking the silence that had fallen. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I never wanted you to find out like this. But it's too late now." Leah's heart pounded harder, her mind racing with 1,000 questions. "What are you talking about, Mom?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Margaret met her gaze, her eyes filled with something Leah couldn't name. Regret, fear, or something deeper, something far more complex. "You're not who you think you are," she whispered. "And neither am I." The words hit Leah like a slap to the face, cold and brutal. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. It was as though the world around her had tilted on its axis, and she was spinning out of control. What did that even mean? "You're not who you think you are," Margaret repeated, more forcefully this time. "The truth about your father, about your real identity. It's not what you've been told." Luna reached out for Leah's hand, her grip tight and urgent. "What do you mean, Mom?" she demanded. "What is this all about?" Margaret closed her eyes, tears beginning to well up as she whispered, "I didn't want this for you. I didn't want you to find out. But they're here now, and there's no turning back." Leah and Luna exchanged a glance, fear now flooding every inch of their being. What had they uncovered? What had their mother been hiding all these years? The truth was right there, within arm's reach, and yet it felt more out of reach than ever before. The storm they had feared had finally arrived, and it was more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. The past weighs heavy. The air in the room was thick with tension, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Leah and Luna sat in stunned silence, their minds racing to make sense of their mother's words. "You're not who you think you are." The phrase repeated itself in their minds, echoing in the space between them like a challenge, one that neither of them was sure they were ready to face. Leah's eyes never left Margaret's, searching for some hint, some sign of explanation. But Margaret was already looking away, her hands trembling in her lap as she tried to find the strength to continue. Her face, usually composed and stern, was now drawn with exhaustion and fear, the weight of years of hidden truths pressing down on her. Luna's voice broke the silence, sharp and insistent. "What does that mean, Mom? What aren't you telling us?" Margaret swallowed hard, her gaze flicking to the door as though checking to make sure no one was listening, then to the men outside, who stood unmoving at the threshold. They hadn't entered yet, but Leah could feel their presence like a distant storm on the horizon. Her heart thudded heavily in her chest, a constant reminder that whatever their mother had been hiding, it was far from simple. "You have to understand," Margaret began, her voice wavering. "I kept you both in the dark for a reason. Your father, he's not the man I told you he was, and you're not, biologically, his daughters." Her words fell like stones into the quiet room, heavy and shattering. It felt like the ground beneath their feet had opened up, and there was no escape from the truth now. Leah's mind reeled. Not biologically his daughters. Her throat tightened as if she couldn't breathe, couldn't make sense of what she was hearing. Luna's face went pale, her mouth moving soundlessly, as though she were trying to process the enormity of what their mother had just said. The twins had always been told their father had simply disappeared, gone out of their lives when they were young. There had never been any doubt in their minds that he was the man who had fathered them. "Mom," Luna whispered, her voice barely audible. You mean we're not his? How is that possible? Who are we?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, Leah saw the depth of sorrow in her mother's face. She hadn't been hiding a secret out of malice or anger. It had been fear. Fear of what would happen if the truth ever came to light, and fear of the unknown consequences of revealing something so deeply buried. She took a shaky breath. You were both born from a different source. Your real father, he's someone I never wanted you to know about. And the truth about your ancestry, it's far darker than anything I could have imagined." Luna shot a look at Leah, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What do you mean? What are you saying? Are we adopted? Are we?" "No," Margaret interrupted, her voice strained, almost pleading. "No, you weren't adopted, but your biological father, he's someone I tried to protect you from. And now, because of these DNA tests, that protection has failed." Leah's breath caught in her throat. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in closer with each word their mother spoke. Someone she tried to protect them from. The question of who that person was hung in the air, unspoken but undeniably present. Margaret stood abruptly, pacing the small space, her hands wringing together nervously. "I never wanted to burden you with this, but now you have to know. Your father was part of something dangerous. And when he found out he was going to be a father, he disappeared. I didn't want you to ever know what kind of world he was involved in, what kind of people he was tied to." Luna's voice was unsteady, a mix of anger and confusion. "What do you mean? Who is he, Mom? Why would you hide this from us? Why didn't you tell us the truth when we were older?" Margaret turned to face them, her eyes red-rimmed with tears. "Because I was trying to protect you. I didn't want you two to get caught up in the mess that was his life. I wanted you to have a chance at something better. A chance at a normal life. But now it's all unraveling. Those men out there, they're part of that world. And they're here because they know what you've discovered." Leah felt a sudden, icy coldness creep through her veins. Her mind spun. Those men out there. Her thoughts raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. Margaret's cryptic warning. The urgency of the situation. It was clear now that the stakes were much higher than she had imagined. "Who are they?" Leah asked, her voice small but firm, the weight of the question pressing down on her. "What do they want from us?" Margaret hesitated, her lips trembling as she fought to hold back more tears. "They're from a government agency, a group that monitors individuals with connections to criminal organizations. Your father, he was a part of something far more dangerous than you could ever imagine. He wasn't just some man who left. He was involved with people who do unspeakable things. Things I never wanted you to know." Luna shook her head, disbelief still clouding her face. "But how could that be true? If he was so dangerous, why didn't we ever know? Why didn't you?" "I couldn't tell you because I didn't want you to become targets," Margaret interrupted, her voice trembling with desperation. "You don't understand, Luna. He wasn't just an ordinary man. He was involved with people who will stop at nothing to get what they want. And now that you've started digging into your ancestry, now that you've stirred this up, they're going to come for you. They're already here." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Leah struggled to keep herself grounded. Her thoughts were jumbled, her emotions in freefall. The truth about their father had been kept hidden from them for all their lives. And now, in a matter of minutes, everything had changed. The DNA test wasn't just a school project anymore. It had become a trigger, a catalyst that set in motion a chain of events they couldn't undo. The man with the folder, the one who had been standing by the door, stepped forward. "Ms. James," he said in a low, controlled voice, "we need to speak with you now. The longer you wait, the more complicated this will get." Leah's pulse quickened as the reality of the situation hit her like a wave. These men were no longer just strangers at the door. They were part of something much larger, something dark and dangerous. And they had come for them. Margaret turned to face them, her body sagging with the weight of years of secrecy. "I know," she whispered. "I'll go with you. But you have to promise me one thing. You have to protect my daughters. No matter what happens. Promise me." The man nodded, his expression unreadable. "We will protect them, Ms. James, but you need to come with us now." Luna stepped forward, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance. You're not taking her anywhere until we know exactly what's going on. You've come into our lives, disrupted everything, and now you're telling us we're in danger." The man turned to her, his eyes sharp. "You don't understand yet, but you will. And when you do, you'll wish you hadn't uncovered the truth." Leah's heart raced as she watched the exchange unfold. The men had been patient so far, but there was a coldness in their eyes, a finality to their words that chilled her to the bone. The truth they had uncovered wasn't just a family secret. It was a doorway to something far more dangerous. The storm had arrived, and they were standing in its eye. "Mom," Leah whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "What do we do now?" Margaret's eyes were filled with sorrow as she stepped toward her daughters, her hands outstretched. "Whatever happens, you two need to stick together. You have each other, and that's all that matters now." As the men moved to escort Margaret away, Leah and Luna were left standing in the middle of the room, their world shattered. The answers they had sought had come, but they had brought with them more questions than they could bear. And as they watched their mother disappear into the unknown, they knew that nothing in their lives would ever be the same again. The hidden path. The apartment was suffocatingly silent after the men left with Margaret, their footsteps fading down the hallway, each echo more final than the last. Leah and Luna stood there, frozen, the weight of everything they had just learned pressing down on them like an insurmountable force. Their mother, the woman who had been their rock, their protector, had just been taken from them. She had been the one constant in their world, and now she was gone, swept away by a world they hadn't even known existed. Leah's hands were still trembling. She felt the emptiness in her chest as she reached for Luna, who stood a few steps away, her back to the wall, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if to hold everything together. "What just happened?" Luna asked, her voice strained, raw. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of disbelief and fear, but underneath it all, there was a flicker of determination. "We can't just let this go, Leah. We can't let them take her and not know what's going on." Leah nodded numbly. "I know. But where do we even start? Our mom's gone. The truth about our father, about everything, is still a mystery. We don't even know what we're up against." Luna took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "We're going to figure it out. We'll find the answers. We have to. If Mom was right, if all of this is part of something bigger, then it's up to us to uncover it. We can't let them erase everything." The word "them" lingered in the air, an unspoken threat hanging between them. The men in the suits, whoever they were, they clearly had connections to something that went far beyond their small world. It wasn't just a family secret. It was a network, a web of intrigue and danger that reached into places Leah and Luna could hardly begin to imagine. As the minutes stretched into what felt like hours, Leah's mind raced with possibilities. What had their mother meant when she said their biological father had been involved with dangerous people? Who were those people? And why hadn't Margaret told them the whole truth? Luna's voice brought Leah back to the present. "We can't stay here, can we? We can't just sit in this apartment waiting for whatever happens next." Leah glanced around their apartment. The modest, cramped space now felt like a prison. The scent of lavender, once a comforting reminder of their grandmother, now felt suffocating. The warmth of the home was gone, replaced by a palpable sense of danger. It was no longer a safe haven. It was a place that held the echoes of secrets too heavy to bear. "We need to get out," Leah said, her voice firm. "We need to find out what's happening, why they're after us, why they're after Mom. We need to find a way to track her down, to get answers." Luna's gaze flickered toward the window. The street outside was as busy as ever, people going about their lives, unaware of the storm that had just swept through their own. She walked over to the window and peered outside, scanning the area for anything unusual. The black SUV that had been parked across the street earlier was gone, but that didn't mean the danger had passed. No, this was just the beginning. "We can't do this alone, Leah," Luna said after a long pause. "We need help. We need someone who knows what's going on. Someone who can help us understand what we're up against." Leah stared at her sister for a moment, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. Who do we even trust? We don't know who's on our side and who's after us. We don't even know who's behind all of this. Luna was silent for a long time, deep in thought. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady but with an edge of resolve. "I think I know someone who might be able to help, but it's risky. And I don't know if it'll work, but we don't have any other choice, do we?" Leah's curiosity piqued, and she took a step toward Luna. "Who?" Luna turned to face her. "Do you remember the old man who used to live next door to us? Mr. Calloway?" Leah furrowed her brow. The name was familiar, but the memories felt distant. Mr. Calloway had been a reclusive man, always keeping to himself, rarely speaking to anyone. He'd lived in the apartment building for as long as they had, but no one really knew much about him. He was always polite, but distant, and his apartment had always seemed locked away behind heavy curtains, as if he didn't want anyone to see inside. "Yeah," Leah said, trying to recall the man's face. "He was strange, always keeping to himself. But what does he have to do with all of this?" Luna looked away, her expression grim. "What you don't know is that Mr. Calloway wasn't just some retired man living alone. He had connections to people. People who knew things. People who could find things out. When I was younger, I overheard him talking to someone on the phone once. Someone from a government agency, or maybe something worse. I don't know the full story, but I've always had the feeling he knew more than he ever let on." Leah's mind raced. The pieces didn't quite fit, but Luna's intuition had always been sharp, and if she believed Mr. Calloway could help them, then Leah had no choice but to trust her. "You think he knows about Dad? About what's going on with Mom?" Luna hesitated. "I don't know, but he's the only person I can think of who might have the information we need. If anyone knows about the world our mother was hiding from us, it's him." Leah glanced toward the door, still feeling the presence of those men outside. She didn't know how much time they had before things escalated again, but one thing was clear: they had to act fast. The longer they waited, the less control they had over the situation. They had to take a risk, even if it felt like stepping into the unknown. "Let's go," Leah said, her voice steady, though she could feel the weight of everything pressing down on her shoulders. "We'll go to Mr. Calloway. If he knows anything, it's time to find out." Luna nodded. The resolve in her eyes mirrored Leah's. It was a risky move, but it was the only move they had left. They couldn't sit idly by, hoping the answers would come to them. They had to chase the truth, even if it meant walking into the very heart of the storm. They grabbed their jackets and headed out the door, stepping into the hallway of the apartment building. The familiar creak of the floorboards beneath their feet did nothing to ease the weight in their chests. Every sound, every movement felt amplified, as if the world was on edge, holding its breath along with them. The elevator ride down to the ground floor felt longer than it ever had before. As the doors opened with a soft ding, the twins stepped into the lobby. The building was quiet, too quiet, and the hairs on the back of Leah's neck stood up. They were being watched, she could feel it, even though there was no one around. As they made their way out of the building and onto the street, the cool air of the evening hit them like a slap. The city had its usual hum, the noise of traffic, the distant chatter of people, but Leah felt as though they were moving through a world that wasn't entirely theirs anymore. They had crossed into a place where nothing was certain, where everything they thought they knew was being torn apart. Mr. Calloway's apartment wasn't far, just a few blocks away, but it might as well have been a lifetime. Each step they took felt like a step into a new world, a world filled with secrets, danger, and the unknown. As they turned the corner and approached the building where Mr. Calloway lived, Leah took a deep breath. They had no idea what they would find inside, no idea whether he would help them or turn them away. But they had no other choice. The answers they sought were just out of reach, and the only way forward was to take that leap into the dark. And so, with the weight of their mother's words still echoing in their minds, Leah and Luna knocked on Mr. Calloway's door, ready to uncover whatever hidden path lay ahead. The man behind the curtain. The sound of their knock hung in the air for what felt like an eternity. Leah and Luna stood in front of Mr. Calloway's door, the silence stretching between them like an invisible thread. The dim hallway around them felt oppressive, the low hum of the city outside muffled by the thick walls of the building. The few lights that flickered from above cast long shadows, making every corner seem darker, more mysterious. The uncertainty of what awaited them on the other side of the door made their nerves tighten, but neither of them was willing to back down now. Leah glanced at Luna. Her sister's face was set in a mask of determination, her jaw clenched, but Leah could see the undercurrent of worry in her eyes. Whatever was going on, whatever truth they were about to uncover, was bigger than they could have ever imagined. But they had to know. They couldn't afford to live in ignorance anymore, especially not after everything that had happened with their mother. Another knock, louder this time, broke the stillness. Luna stepped back, her body tense. They were running out of time. "I don't know what we're walking into, Leah," Luna whispered, glancing at the door. "But I think whatever it is, it's going to change everything." Leah nodded. "I know. We've come this far. We have to see it through." The door creaked open, and Leah's breath hitched. Mr. Calloway's weathered face appeared in the doorway, his thin, graying hair disheveled, his deep-set eyes narrowing as they met theirs. He looked older than Leah remembered, more fragile, yet there was something sharp in his gaze, something alert that didn't belong in the tired, recluse persona he had cultivated for years. He studied them for a moment, as if measuring their intentions. Then, his eyes flicked behind them, down the dim corridor. Without saying a word, he stepped aside, silently motioning for them to enter. Leah and Luna had exchanged wary glances before stepping into the small, dimly lit apartment. The air inside smelled of stale tobacco and dust, and the apartment was filled with a clutter of old books, papers, and faded furniture. It was the kind of place where nothing seemed to have been touched in years, where time had come to a standstill. Yet, despite the worn, unkempt appearance, there was an underlying sense of order. Every piece of furniture, every stack of paper, placed in deliberate disarray, like a puzzle waiting to be solved. As Mr. Calloway closed the door behind them, the twins turned to face him. He was already seated in a worn armchair, his gaze still locked on them with an unsettling intensity. "You've come a long way," he said, his voice gravelly, as though it had not been used in a while. "But I think you already know that." Luna crossed her arms, her expression skeptical. "We're not here for small talk, Mr. Calloway. We need answers. You've known something about our family, about our father, something we don't understand, and we need to know what it is." Mr. Calloway's eyes flickered with something like amusement, but it was brief, disappearing almost as quickly as it appeared. "Your father." He trailed off for a moment, his hands resting on his knees. "Your mother never wanted you to know the truth, but you were always going to find out eventually." Leah felt a chill settle in her chest. She could feel Luna's gaze on her, sharp with curiosity and disbelief. Mr. Calloway's words were heavy, loaded with unspoken meaning. Every sentence he spoke seemed to carry the weight of years, secrets long buried. And now they were all coming to the surface. "What truth?" Luna pressed, her voice sharp. "What are you talking about? You're saying you know our father." Mr. Calloway didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped in his lap. His eyes seemed to lose focus as if he were transported to another time. Another world, one where the twins hadn't been born yet, where their father's life had taken a different course. "Your father," he began slowly, his voice low, "wasn't who your mother told you he was. He wasn't just some man who ran off and left his family behind. No, he was far more complicated than that. He was involved with people who could erase lives as easily as they could make them. And he was trying to escape them, trying to protect you." Leah and Luna exchanged a glance. The words were like a punch to the gut. They had always known that there had been something off about their father's absence, something that didn't add up, but hearing it laid out like this, hearing it from someone who seemed to know more than anyone else, was terrifying. "Why didn't he just tell us?" Leah asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of confusion and anger. "Why keep us in the dark? If it was so dangerous, why not protect us by telling us the truth?" Mr. Calloway's eyes softened, as though the question itself was one he had heard 1,000 times, and yet it still stung. "Because, child, sometimes the truth is more dangerous than the lie. And sometimes, even the people who want to protect you don't know how to do it. Your father was afraid of what would happen if you knew too much. He thought you'd be better off without the burden of his past. He thought you'd have a chance at a normal life." Luna's voice was quiet, though it was laced with frustration. "But we don't have a normal life, Mr. Calloway. None of us do. Our mother's been taken, and everything we thought we knew has been turned upside down. We need answers now." Mr. Calloway studied her carefully before nodding, as though he had been expecting this moment. "I can give you answers, but not the ones you're expecting. The people your father was running from, they're still out there. And they've been watching you, both of you, for a long time." Leah's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean? Who are these people? What do they want with us?" Mr. Calloway leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper. "They're part of a shadow network, a group of individuals who operate in the dark corners of society. They've been around for decades, and your father, he was deeply involved with them. He tried to break free, but breaking free from that world is harder than you think. Once you're in, there's no real escape." The words hit Leah like a thunderclap. The idea of a shadow network, of people who controlled lives from behind the scenes, was both overwhelming and terrifying. She had always thought of the world in simpler terms, good people and bad people, with clear lines between the two. But now she was realizing that the truth wasn't so simple. The lines were blurred, and they were standing right in the middle of it all, caught between a past they couldn't control and a future they didn't understand. Luna, ever the skeptic, shook her head. "So, what? You're saying our father was involved with some criminal organization, and now we're just supposed to accept that?" Mr. Calloway sighed deeply, as though the weight of the truth he was about to reveal was almost too much for him to bear. "Your father wasn't a criminal in the traditional sense. He was an operative. He worked for these people, doing things that could never be undone. But when he found out about you two, when he realized that you were his children, he tried to cut ties. He tried to escape the life they had planned for him, but it wasn't enough. They don't let go that easily." Leah felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Her whole life, she had thought of their father as just a shadow, a distant figure who had simply walked away from them. But now, hearing the reality of who he had been, who he really had been, felt like a betrayal. How could their mother have kept this from them for so long? And how could they possibly be involved in something so dangerous? "Are you saying we're involved in this now?" Luna asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. "That because of our father, we're marked by these people?" Mr. Calloway's expression was grave. "I'm afraid so. They'd been keeping tabs on you for years. And now that you've started digging into your family's past, they know you're getting closer to the truth. They won't stop until they find you." Leah and Luna felt the walls close in around them. Their father's secrets, their mother's silence, the shadows lurking just out of sight. It all felt like too much to bear. They had come seeking answers, but what they had found was a nightmare far more complicated than they had ever expected. The room felt colder now, as though the very air had shifted with the knowledge of what lay ahead. The twins had crossed a threshold, and there was no going back. Whatever they chose to do next, they were in it now. There was no escaping the web that had been spun around their lives. And the truth, dangerous and complex as it was, had only just begun to unfold. The path to freedom. The truth, once uncovered, had unraveled everything Leah and Luna thought they knew about their world. The path that lay ahead of them was shrouded in uncertainty, but there was no turning back now. Their father's involvement in a shadowy network, their mother's desperate attempts to protect them, and the undeniable danger that had followed them all their lives. They had come face to face with a reality far darker than they could have imagined. But even in the face of fear, they knew one thing for certain. They were stronger than they had ever known. The revelation that their father had been part of something dangerous, that they were somehow tied to a world they hadn't even realized existed, had shaken them to their core. And yet, as they stood together in Mr. Calloway's apartment, listening to the old man's grave warnings, they found something else. The spark of determination. They may not have known everything yet, but they had each other, and that was enough. After a long, silent moment, Luna spoke, her voice steady but filled with quiet resolve. So we have a choice now. We can either run from this, hide and try to forget about everything we've learned, or we can take control and face whatever comes next. Leah looked at her sister, her heart swelling with pride. Luna had always been the more pragmatic of the two, the one who never backed down from a challenge. It was that same strength that Leah had relied on all her life. And now, it was the force that would carry them forward. I don't want to run, Leah said, her voice firm. I want to know who we are, where we come from, and what's been hidden from us for so long. We didn't choose this life, but we can choose what we do with it now. Mr. Calloway, who had been watching the twins quietly, nodded approvingly. It's a hard road ahead, but there's one thing I've learned in all my years of dealing with people like them. The truth can be your most powerful weapon if you know how to wield it. The twins exchanged a glance. They had always lived in the shadow of questions, of missing pieces that didn't quite fit. But now, as they looked at each other, they understood something profound. It wasn't just the truth they were seeking. It was the power to define their own lives, to step out from beneath the weight of their past and make their own future. You can't change your past, Mr. Calloway continued, his voice quiet but filled with conviction. But you can choose how to move forward. And the people you're up against, if you let fear control you, they will always win. But if you fight back, if you stand your ground and refuse to be victims of your circumstances, that's when you'll find your freedom. It wasn't an easy choice. Leah and Luna both knew that. The life they had envisioned, the one where they could just be ordinary girls navigating school, growing up, and finding their place in the world, had been ripped away. But as much as they longed for simplicity, they understood that life was rarely simple. It was messy, complicated, and often full of dark corners. But it was theirs to live, and they were going to live it on their terms. The twins made a pact then, a promise to each other that they would no longer be passive observers of their own lives. They would be active participants, not just in uncovering the past, but in taking back their power. They weren't going to allow the shadow of their father's choices to dictate who they became. They left Mr. Calloway's apartment with a sense of purpose, their path now clear. They had made the decision to confront the past head-on, to gather the pieces of their story that had been buried for so long. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't come without sacrifice. But they were ready. They had each other, and that was enough. Days turned into weeks as they searched for answers. They reached out to the few contacts Mr. Calloway had given them, navigating a maze of underground networks and cryptic information. They were relentless, pushing through every dead end and false lead with the single-minded determination that only sisters bound by blood could possess. It wasn't always clear who they could trust, but each time they stumbled, they found their footing again, stronger than before. Slowly but surely, the pieces began to fall into place. They uncovered more about their father's past, his real name, his ties to the organization that had once controlled his every move, and most importantly, the people he had betrayed in his desperate attempt to protect his family. They learned about the dangerous men who had come for their mother, who had threatened to destroy everything in their path if they didn't comply. But with each discovery, they also found their own strength. They weren't victims in this story. They were survivors. And as the twins finally uncovered the truth about the organization, its leaders, its reach, and its fall, they knew that the real power had always been within them. It wasn't about who their father had been or who their mother had tried to shield them from. It was about the choices they made now, about how they chose to live in the aftermath of it all. In the end, Leah and Luna discovered something even more valuable than the secrets of their past: their own resilience. The truth they had sought wasn't just a revelation about their father's life. It was a lesson in courage, in the strength that comes from embracing the unknown, and in the power of family. As they stood together, watching the sun set over the city, they realized that the future wasn't something to fear. It was something to create. They had the power to write their own story now, to build a life that was free from the shadows of the past. And in that moment, they understood what their mother had tried to protect them from all along. It wasn't the danger itself. It was the fear of living in a world where they didn't know who they truly were. But now they did. And no matter what came next, they were ready. Together. And that was all they needed to face the world. In life, we often face challenges that feel insurmountable, secrets that shatter the image of what we thought was true, and fears that keep us from moving forward. But in those moments of uncertainty, we have the power to choose how we respond. Our past doesn't define us. How we move forward does. We can face our fears, uncover our truths, and ultimately take control of our own narrative. No matter how dark the road may seem, the strength to overcome it lies within us, and the bonds we share with others can light the way. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.